Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from steamy, hot, and humid Delray Beach, Florida. Happy to have you with us today on this bright, sunny day. Hey, listen, folks, it may be bright and sunny and hot outside, and about the only thing that's going to sort of rival the heat, if you will, are these inflation numbers. As we've been telling you for months, yes, energy prices have come down over the past 2 months, but a couple things remain highly elevated. Food prices, rent prices, cost of renting an apartment or a house, and then medical costs. Collectively, add them all together between the rising cost of food, the rising cost of shelter, the rising cost of medical, coupled with declining cost of gasoline. You still had inflation raise 0.1% last month, and it's sitting there at a stubborn 8.3%. 8.3% year over year, folks. A lot of people, a lot of economists thought due to gasoline prices that inflation might come down by 0.1% this past month, but that didn't happen. Instead, you got the opposite. Instead of coming down 0.1%, you got an increase. What does that mean for everybody listening and viewing to our show? I'll tell you what it means. It means the cost of virtually everything other than gasoline has gone up. And when you add in food costs, higher rent costs, medical costs, and then costs to employers, employee costs have also gone up significantly. Folks, you're staring at problems down the road. As a result of these numbers today, the Federal Reserve, which meets in a few weeks, is going to raise interest rates another 75 basis points. There was some talk on Wall Street it might go all the way up to a full 100 basis points. I don't think that's going to happen. But again, you have stubbornly high inflation. We've been saying it for months. The Biden administration lied to you again, telling you inflation is coming down when it's not. And you basically have a situation. Just imagine where we would be had gasoline prices not gone down as precipitously as they did. These prices, folks, are hurting regular American families just trying to keep their head above water. It's really bad out there. And to put it in perspective, we've been telling you about food costs. Grocery costs last month were up 13.5%. Folks, that is the highest increase in food costs since 1979, when Jimmy Carter was president. You know, what are these Democrats running on right now? It's astounding. It's astounding to me anyone can ever vote for a Democrat, period, based upon the horrific policies that they have. But in this country, you know, a third of the country's Democrats. And for whatever warped ideology they worship at, they don't seem to care about the fact their own party's inflicting pain on them. That's right. A lot of pain are being inflicted on Democrats by Democrats. We're used to it as Republicans, them inflicting pain on us when they're in power. Their policies are horrific. It always leads to something going wrong. And in this case, it's high inflation. Folks, these numbers are a disaster. And from a political perspective, coming here, we are 45 days prior to the midterm. Actually, less than that. People start voting in about 30 days. So think about it's affecting individuals. 13.5% increase for food. That is off the charts. And you got Biden wallowing around and Vice President lying out of her teeth every time she opens her mouth, saying, oh, you know, we're tackling this inflation. No, they're not. Wall Street was expecting better, and it got worse. As a result, the Dow Jones average is down about 850 points. The NASDAQ's down about 400. The S&P 500 is down about 100 points. The overall market's down about 2.5% just one day today. Interest rates on 2-year notes at 3.7% today. Let me put that in perspective for you. If you want to buy a government bond that matures in 2 years, the government will pay you 3.7%. Risk-free. Risk-free. In other words, you put $100,000 into a note, you're going to get $103,700 back in 2 years. Guaranteed, $3,700, 3.3700 per year. That 100 grand. You get $7,400 back in 2 years. That's what stocks have to compete with now. And the inversion, meaning the 2-year rate over the 10-year rate, it's over 30 basis points now. Folks, interest rates are going to continue to go higher. There is no alternative to this. The easy money policies of the Federal Reserve over the years, coupled with the atrocious, the gross spending of the Biden administration back in the first quarter of 2021 after Biden was inaugurated. And all those Democrats wanted to spend your money. Oh, they sure did. 1.9 trillion of it, folks. And that filtered through the system. And at the same time, you had the Federal Reserve pouring gasoline on the fire, keeping rates artificially low for too long, and now they're in a panic. We've talked about this for years. We've had Dr. Michael Bussler on talking about it. Dave Pratt, Dean of the Business School, Liberty University. They've been warning you about this. I could go on and on. Jerry Boyer, other economists, on and on. We've warned that this was going to happen. And sure enough, we're not trying to be prophetic here, but everything we said would happen is happening. And what do the Democrats do? They lie to you. It is disgusting. We're having to pay the price for their stupidity, their ridiculous tax and spend policies. And then they pass 2 other ridiculous bills, the Inflation Enhancement Act, as I call it. They call it the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not going to do a damn thing to help inflation. Wharton School of Business came out and said it's not even going to move the needle 0.1%. And you better get used to it, folks, because that's what Democrats do for a living. They lie. And that's the sad truth. Tell that to the families of Americans who are struggling. No wonder people aren't going to the store and buying clothes and goods, computers, equipment. They're trying to feed themselves with food and gas prices the way they are and pay their rents. My goodness, some of these landlords across the country are ridiculous. They're raising the rental rates 10, 15%. People can't afford that. It's forcing people to move. And yet, because there's a shortage of affordable housing in this country, landlords are sort of in a win position. They can sort of dictate the rents. Now, if they were smart, they wouldn't adjust them as maximum as they could. Maybe take into account, if you don't raise them as high, maybe your tenants will stay there. You won't have tenants moving. But a lot of people are short-sighted. They don't think that way. And rents are escalating. And it's putting a real cramp in people. They've got to pay their rent to keep shelter. They got to put gas in their car. Gas has come down, but it's still high. And then they got to go to the grocery and pay 13.5% more for food than they did a year ago. And this is the prosperity that Democrats are going to run on? I wouldn't run on that. No way. And yet, what else are they going to run on? We have the elections coming up here, 30 to 45 days. People are going to be voting in 30 days. And you have hourly earnings of workers went up 0.2% last month. Guess what, though? Year over year, they're down 2.8%. So you got wages that peaked and are now somewhat declining while you have inflation raging. Folks, that is not a winning issue at the ballot. But some people, they're low information voters. Most of the Democratic voters, I hate to use the term dumber than a rock, but they are. They follow that Democratic orthodoxy. And they vote Democrat. Why? I can't come up with a single reason. Yeah, you've got your environmental wackos, and you got the people who vote simply on abortion, and you got the people that vote because they want to see, men playing girls basketball and so forth. You got your hardcore leftist radicals that vote Democrat regardless. We get it. We know it. Understand it. The Biden administration is trying to bribe young people with student loan forgiveness. It's illegal. It's coming right before the election. Probably going to get shot down, but right now it's alive and well. So we say it's classic Democrat. Try to buy the votes, cover up your record because your record stinks. Oh, and they're taking it a step further. They got the Department of Justice subpoenaing 40 members of the Trump administration, trying to inflict political revenge on their opponents right before a midterm election. I tell you, I give this White House credit for one thing. They play hardcore knuckleball politics pretty damn good. And our side better wake up to the fact that these people are doing this stuff. Look, most Americans care about three issues predominantly. They care about inflation. They're concerned about their safety, given that crime is escalating so much. And the third issue is border security. We have 2 million people cross the border. And what does Kamala Harris do about it? Isn't she the border czar? Well, Andy Biggs, a representative from Arizona, a district who, under President Trump, 9,000 people in the course of a year across the border. You know what it is under Biden? 340,000. And Harris, who is, folks, I'm trying not to be partisan. I've lived through Democratic vice presidents before. From Biden to Mondale, I could go through a litany of them. Kamala Harris is the worst vice president I have ever experienced, and it's not even a close second. She's terrible. She lies constantly. And for her to come out and say the border is secure is a joke. Andy Biggs, trying not to be disrespectful, to the vice president because she does hold, the esteemed office, said it was a knucklehead. Actually called her a knucklehead. No, we're not going to do that. Okay, but the policy's knuckleheaded. She actually is telling people the border is secure when it's not. And her idea, well, despite the fact 2 million illegal aliens are flooding in, there's drugs everywhere at that border. It's killing American kids. Now, what does she do? Well, we can have a path to citizenship. You think a path to citizenship is on Americans' minds? Not even close. They want a secure border. They want this ridiculous crime sprees to stop and these democratic policies of giving people get out of jail cards for all but the worst murderers. No wonder crime's escalating. And that has social implications too. So, we got a mess on our hands here. With this inflation running 8.3%, crime everywhere, border just people pouring across it. And now, even the New York Times is saying, these early polls where Democrats may be picking up some steam on the congressional ballot, some of these Senate races, New York Times is issuing a warning to Democrats because it's a democratic institution. These polls may not indicate what's really happening. We haven't seen a red wave break yet. Look, we said on our show yesterday, the Senate could go either way, plus or minus a couple seats. We're not going to change that forecast in one day because of the inflation. The House forecasting 15 to 20 seats. I think that's still a secure bet. But again, Democrats are taking notes. And when the New York Times publishes a story like that, that should be a red or at least a yellow warning signal to Democrats. Now, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, she's no dummy. For the longest time, we have to have COVID restrictions in New York. My God, we're having COVID restrictions. It's an emergency. What do you know? Here we are, 45 to 60 days outside of an election, and Hochul lifts the COVID restrictions in New York. Come on, folks. It's a blatant political tool. You know and I know it. There never should have been these COVID restrictions anyhow. It is interesting, though. A lot of these young kids who are working from home, young millennials, etc., and their employers are telling them, hey, time to go back to work. New York Times had 130 say, we're not going. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, folks, because workers are in such demand right now. A lot of younger millennial workers who have gotten used to working from home are saying, "Oh, we're going into the office. I'm not going into the office. I'll work from home." We'll see how these democratic institutions respond to that. Now, let's get some good international news here. How about the Ukrainians, folks? Unbelievable. You know, when we gave our report the other day, they've taken back almost 1,200 square miles, 2,300 square miles of territory taken back. A large number of Russian prisoners of war taken. There is even talk the Ukrainians could defeat the Russians. Now, what's this going to mean for Putin? Well, you had some people saying, well, his next step is to use nuclear weapons. I don't, but that is unthinkable. Even Putin said that. But the Russians are up against it right now. And American weapons get a lot of credit for that, as we talked about on yesterday's show. 2,300 miles of recaptured square miles of recaptured territory. That's a big deal, folks. So where it goes from here, I mean, the momentum is clearly in the Ukrainians' favor, and the Russian soldiers are demoralized. They're saying, what the hell are we over here fighting? So Eastern Europe, keep an eye out for what's happening there, folks. The Ukrainians, fiercely loyal to their own country, hating the savage Russians. And with American and NATO weapons support, they are proving a great fighting force. Now, back to politics for a minute. Last primaries of the year, or tonight. We have primaries in New Hampshire. We have primaries in Rhode Island. There's a primary for New Hampshire Republicans to determine who's going to be the Senate candidate to run against Maggie Hassan, who's not popular in New Hampshire. And then there's a congressional race in New Hampshire. Both of these races pit basically Trump supporters versus establishment supporters. We'll see how the results. We'll report on these results on Wednesday. We don't want to forecast in advance. Let the people vote and have their say. And there's also a primary election, particularly one for governor in Rhode Island. So at the conclusion of tomorrow, all the primaries will be done, and it's a sprint to the general election. And as we mentioned yesterday, these races are very tight, folks. So polls may lead you to believe one thing, but ultimately you need to get out there and vote. Now, speaking of that, you know, a local reporter in Las Vegas, charges were brought up today against the Democratic politician accused of murdering that person. But an investigative reporter for the Las Vegas, what is it, the Sun Review, something, the local newspaper in Las Vegas, was murdered last week. And after an investigation, a Democratic politician's been charged. You know, we're not going to convict, obviously, but having a Democratic politician charged with killing an investigative reporter, my goodness. Terrible situation there. Terrible. So, folks, you know, we talk about all these issues, talk about a lot of what the economy, the pocketbook issues, what it's doing to you. And the blame clearly falls on the lap of the Democratic Party. It's their policies that are crushing people. It's the profligate spending of the Democratic Party. And again, the Federal Reserve is doing what it can to combat these inflation dragons, if you will. But at 8.3% and not going down, folks, look at the last few readings. 9.1, 8.5, 8.3, 8.7. I mean, these are high inflation numbers. When you're in the mid-8s, and then classically, when you take out food and energy costs, core inflation, well above normal. Core inflation's at 6.3%, folks. That is way above where it needs to be. And that's when they, quote, strip out food and energy because why? They're volatile. Well, as we said, in 1 month, last month, grocery bills up 13.5%, while Basic food costs were up 0.8%, and rents up 0.7. Folks, these increases cannot be sustained because the punishing effect that the Democratic Party is having on average American is crushing. So, folks, when you go to the polls and you're thinking about, who to vote for, look at the party that put you in this precarious situation, which is the Democratic Party. They are the party responsible for high rents, high inflation, high crime rates, insanely high border crossings, which leads to massive drug abuse, killing thousands of American kids from this fentanyl overdose. And what do the Democrats have to point to? Nothing. Yeah, they passed an emergency climate bill that they call the Inflation Reduction Act. How's that help the average family? No. When you have India, Russia, China just spewing pollution from coal-fired plants, do you think one country, the United States, stepping up and punishing its economy is going to help? I've got a bridge to say, if you believe that. But anyhow, these are the facts. This is what's happened. And think about that when you go to the polls. What party's responsible for putting you in a situation where your food costs are constantly going up, your rents are going up? Yeah, you got a reprieve in gasoline, but we didn't earlier this year. And there's not to say that gas couldn't rebound quickly if things get out of control over in Europe. So again, we hate saying it, but everything we predicted was going to happen did happen, and there's more pain to come, folks. So you got to get to the ballot box, and you got to vote these Democrats out as we come into the fall election. Okay, I really appreciate you spending time with me today. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of politics, a lot of economics. That's what we're here for, to cut through the BS that you hear coming out of the Biden administration constantly. And we'll cut through the propaganda, and we'll tell you again, straightforward, what's really going on and what you can do about it. Now, I'm going to be traveling tomorrow, folks, back to the West Coast, so we'll have a nice guest coming in, someone you're familiar with. I'll leave the tease at that. You'll see him tomorrow. And I'll be back with you on Thursday from our studios in Irvine. So again, thanks everybody for your support. My brother's doing much improved. I'm really happy with the progress he's making. And thanks to our production crew for doing these shows while I've been on the road. Many thanks. Everybody stay safe. We hope you prosper well. I will see you on Thursday, and Schaftlein Report will be back with a special guest tomorrow. Have a good evening. See you on Thursday.